This video is only part of an unbiased, in-depth review, so check out the rest in the link below at thegoodride.com. Welcome to The Good Ride. I'm James Beastie, and this is the Burton Genesis Step On. Next to it is the good old Step On, and this is the Genesis Reflex. Don't have the EST, but stoked I have these, especially in this time of supply issues where it's very hard to get access to gear. I rode these with my Burton Photon Step-Ons that I use for when I get these bindings. I compared them against my Burton Kendos, my daily drivers that I use with Union Atlas, and that I also used with the Burton Genesis. So kind of a mixed bag in terms of comparison, but I really wanted to see in an extended demo with same day tests what the Genesis Reflex and Kendo would do with the Photon Step-On and Genesis Step-On would do. And it was a great extended demo test, so I got a lot to tell you about. Rode these with a lot of different Burton boards. I rode these with the Burton Territory Manager and a lot of other boards, more than I can mention, and put a lot of days on these in a lot of different conditions. To give you a short summary, despite the drawbacks of not having much boot to binding adjustability, no stance width adjustability if you step outside of the Burton channel system, limited boot choices, and there is this very locked-in feel that doesn't allow you to move that well from tip to tail like you can with the Genesis. These are hands down my favorite step-on bindings. And the reason is these are not as responsive, and I've always felt that the Step-On and the Step-On X were too responsive for my taste, and these are more smooth. They have less calf bite, especially because it's a little more difficult to adjust the high backs, and yet they still have this nice, very responsive, symmetrical turning experience, especially in comparison to the Genesis Reflex and other EST bindings like the Cartel X I tried against all these. But in direct comparison to the Genesis, I found that the toe side response wasn't as responsive as the toe side response on the Genesis Step-On. They're more symmetrical edge to edge, where this feels pretty responsive on the heel side, but not as responsive on the toe side. And yes, I was set up perfectly on the gas pedal. Now, when it comes to weight, these are 1.8 pounds, same weight as the regular Genesis. That's a very light binding. That's up there in the lightest of the light for, non-split board bindings. So pretty cool there. When it comes to Highback Flex, I just love the Genesis Step-Ons softer high back that has a good twist to it and a good bit of give, along with this nice little hammock strap in here. It's not quite as givey and flush as the regular Reflex, but compare this to, this is not the Step-On X, this is just the regular old Step-On. The Step-On X is just too much for me. That's almost like hard booting, but this just has almost no twist and just only a little give. So I just love this easy flexing high back. It just really mellows out the overall ride. And when you can't really adjust as well high back rotation wise as you can with these that have the best high back rotation in the business, that helps eliminate calf bite and improve response. Having this kind of twist is critical for somebody like me with even featured calves. Now, when it comes to flex underfoot and buttering, in comparison to the regular Reflex, and even more so in comparison to the EST version of the Genesis, this is not gonna have as much flex underfoot because this is plastic, but it still gives and flexes, and it's very close to the Reflex. For those of you who haven't been into bindings in a long time, you can see the disc flexes and it has a nice easy flex down the middle. The rest of the binding does as well. So the whole thing kind of bends with the board tip to tail. And it also helps a little bit more with the twist on your turns too. It just allows the board to flex more naturally underfoot and therefore become more responsive. It's easy to butter, but it's much easier to butter with the Genesis Reflex than it is with this, because when you step into this, you can't really move tip to tail that well. You're really locked in right here. And the boot, you're kind of moving the material. You can't move the boot. When you're strapped in, you can move the boot from tip to tail. And that's one thing I don't like about Step On. I wish there was more freedom of movement so you can leverage the tip and tail more and have an easier butter. But with the Genesis, I noticed that locked in feel was a little more dialed back than the regular Step On, and even more so with the Step On X. Now, when it comes to turn initiation and response, I really like the Genesis response better because it's still massively more responsive than anything else I tried, but it is a step back response-wise from the regular Step On and a bigger step back from the Step On X. I always felt like the Step On and the Step On X had too much response. So it's less twitchy, it's less over responsive. And what I really like is how smooth it is edge to edge. But here's one thing that I don't like about the Step On, and this is applicable edge to edge as well as buttering, is you're so locked in right here that it's hard to move this way because this boot is stuck to the high back with the mechanism that works Step On. With this, you're not. So you've got a lot more tip to tail movement and lean, and it feels more comfortable on my joints, on my hips, my knees. I also didn't realize how much I lean this way or this way, depending on the board I'm on, to initiate a turn and complete a turn. So I like having this flex. I think it's much better, and it's especially better when it comes to buttering. But overall, in terms of response and how these two compare, that's the one drawback with Step On. But with the Genesis, I'm feeling more lean than I did before. So in comparison to the regular Step On binding versus the Genesis Step On binding, you'll see even more of a difference where I can kind of lean either way pretty easy here. And with this one, I can lean okay, but I feel way more locked in. There's way less Highback Flex to allow you to do it. And this hammock seems to allow just a little more flex from tip to tail. And it just gives me a little better all around feel. It just feels a little more on the smooth side of ultra responsive, where this just feels ultra responsive. And this is starting to mimic more of a traditional strap-in binding that I personally still like better than Step On. So when it comes to support, you don't have that amazing ankle strap support like you do with the regular Genesis Reflex and EST. The reason why I didn't choose the Burton Kendo Step On to really make this test more apples to apples is because it doesn't have this ankle strap with a boa here that kind of helps duplicate the feeling of this with the Genesis Reflex and EST. I didn't like how the ruler felt like it was folding there. So even though you still get all your response from being connected to the high back on your forward lean, and it's a very responsive setup with any Burton Step On boot, I just like that extra ankle support in uneven terrain. So even comparing a Photon or an Ion with a strap around the ankle to a actual traditional ankle strap, it's lacking, but it's good enough for me to deal with it. But if you ride a lot of uneven conditions, you might like the support of a traditional ankle strap better. There's no ratchet system here, and this in and out is just so easy. It's so fun to be able to just get off the chair and step down in and go. And I can see that appeal, especially if you have a lot of skier friends that just want to go. Having this is great. The one thing though, in and out with these, is it's only good in flat terrain. The minute you start to get an angle, it's very difficult to step in. And in certain situations, especially in a certain amount of steepness, you have to just chop into the side and step in like you would into a strap-in binding. You can still go a little faster. And overall, the difference between just standing up and strapping in and stepping in and going, and even though it can only mean a few seconds if you're very comfortable with strap-in bindings versus step-on, it mentally, it just feels so good, especially when you're frothing, to just step and go. So I get that. I can see why there's so much appeal for these, especially now that I'm enjoying the turning experience and the feel of the binding a little better. Now, when it comes to adjustability, there isn't much going on here. It's very plug and play. So let's use the disc of the Step On, because this is the disc you're gonna get. This is an old disc. There are only 2 positions here that allow you to move forward or backwards on the heel to center your boot in the binding. And same for dealing with non-channel system boards. There's only 2, one up, one back. They're combining everything into one disc to minimize waste. So that's good on that aspect, but not really good in terms of stance width and boot to binding adjustability. But you do have a bunch of holes right here, and you can slide the gas pedal so it matches up perfectly with your boot size. And obviously I think it's more tuned up to Burton boot sizes, but it's really helpful. You can see it says 8.5, 9, 9.5, and 10. So you match these little teeth in the corresponding hole, and then your gas pedals set correctly to your boot. But overall, you're really compromising adjustability wise here. So in conclusion, this was a long ass review, but there was so much to talk about. The addition of the Genesis Step On to the Step On binding line is starting to make it more fun for riders like myself who still prefer strap-in bindings. But moving forward, it would be really fun to have a pair of these to match up with my Photon Step-On boots and use those when I'm testing Burton gear or other stuff that might be fun to use Step-On with. So if you're gonna ask me, I'm gonna say get the Genesis. Even if you like a more responsive binding, you still get so much response out of this, but you just get much better board feel, much better boot to binding integration, and you get a feel closer to strap-in, and I really like that.